Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. I just wanted to record this video. I say video even though this is probably going to be audio only, but I just need to record this because I just finished Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 265 and was so overwhelmed with emotions and thoughts and appreciation for the chapter itself and the story and the characters involved here that I really just felt like I needed to sit down and create just a ramble, a casual ramble of my thoughts and the things I noticed and the things I appreciate and what I think going forward and what I think so far. This isn't going to be a strict scripted analysis. I have no notes and I just have the chapter in front of me, so this is just going to be totally casual. Like I said, there's probably not going to be many visuals to this, if any at all, so feel free to treat this as a podcast, which is the sort of thing I did for my review or thoughts of chapter 236. And speaking of 236, that was in the conversation for my favorite chapter in the series, but I don't know that it is anymore because I really think this one is it. Anyways, feel free to listen to this while you work out, or do work, or wash dishes, or vacuum or something, and let's talk about this chapter. So yeah, I just finished it. I read through it 3 or 4 times because it honestly was an incredible experience that I had to re-experience a few times, and it just spoke to me so deeply that it's unbelievable. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm a huge fan of Yuji Itadori. I've made a pretty extensive analysis about him that I'm pretty proud of, and I think sort of captures why I think he's so effective and resonant. And I think that him, Gojo, and Sukuna are easily my 3 favorite characters in the series, and I think they're easily the 3 best. And it just so happens that this chapter has to do with 2 of the 3, and their dynamic and the beauty of specifically one of them. But Sukuna is a big part of that too, and we'll get into that. I'm already rambling, sorry, this is going to be all over the place, but yeah, it was a nearly spiritual experience for me. It's one of my favorite manga chapters ever. Of course, maybe I'm being very reactionary, and I won't think that in 6 months, but that's just what I feel now, and I'm pretty confident that I don't fall into recency bias a lot of the time. Sometimes it happens, and that's normal, but most of my opinions tend to stick. And I think they will with this one. I think this could easily prove to be the best chapter in this series when all is said and done. At least for me. So anyways, just as a quick summary of what happens in this chapter, Yuji has activated his domain expansion at the end of 264. In a very impulsive, emotional, sort of stream of consciousness presentation and execution of his domain expansion, because as Yuji says, he didn't really have control about where they were going to go, and it just sort of reflects his internal environment and thoughts. But yeah, he transports them to this train station, which ultimately opens up to be this town that Yuji grew up in. I believe he says he wasn't originally born here, but he lived here for a good number of years, I think it was around 5 or 6 years, and he spent a chunk of his childhood here. And here he reflects on his time spent here, and on his life, and what this place was, and what it's become. Sort of about the life he's lived and the natural flow of life and time and experience as the world shifts over time, and the value he sees in it through the memories and nostalgia, but also in the here and now, as he sees places he's been and reflects on them. And what essentially happens here is he uses this sort of as a way, as a last gasp, to try to engage with and reach Sukuna. Instead of defeating him in a sort of Talk no Jutsu-esque way, and by the way, I love Talk no Jutsu, he tries to reach Sukuna, to appeal to the humanity that may be buried deep inside him by sort of brute forcing him into experiencing the perspective of someone who he otherwise would seem not to give the time of day and would not be interested in hearing out. So he's forcing him to hear him out and see what he's feeling and see his thoughts and his memories and his humanity. He is trying to get Sukuna to see the merit in humanity through being forced to engage with the humanity of someone that he dismisses as less than nothing. And so this chapter is just essentially a dialogue between the two. It's primarily a reflection of Yuji's self, and we'll get into that in a second, but what I love about it is that Sukuna is an active participant. It isn't just a monologue. He comments and participates and engages, and I think that means something. So it's a bit of a give and take with regards to the dynamic and balance of the chapter, and I really like that, and I think it was really effective for getting across what Gege is trying to get across. What struck me most about all this is Yuji's growth, and the beauty of his character, and the sort of pragmatic idealism that he's adopted that has lately, I think, in the story, become more idealistic. I talked again in that video I made about him embracing this cog nature of his role in the world, and how he will relentlessly plug away to try to make this world better, to protect the dreams and hopes and lives of those he cares about, and save people. Not in a restrictive way that his grandpa imposed upon him, but again, not in a really idealistic way. That's the sort of conclusion he came to at the end of Shibuya. But I think it's blossomed and evolved into something even more idealistic, while still taking into account the horrific nature of Sukuna and curses and the world he lives in. He has the maturity here through his experiences to shift his perception of the meaning of life and death and all that he talked about in Shibuya, and through those experiences and through what Todo taught him, he's able to grow past and look past his grief, through his pain and his regrets, in order to properly understand what life means to him. And his defiance sort of shifts from being a cog with no independent agency and only being the frayed ends of an identity to Yuji Itadori, this cog, because I do still think that he's a cog, who now embraces and takes pride in his role. I do still think he's a cog, but the complexion changes. And some have said across like Twitter, and that's the main place I've seen it, or I've seen people talk about it, that he's totally free now, and that he is the new honored one. And I get the sentiment in essence, but I don't agree. Not 100%, because I don't think that anyone other than Sukuna can be free in this setting, as it is. Truly free. You know, even characters that you would assume are totally free, like Gojo, is incredibly chained to me. Incredibly chained by regrets, self-imposed regrets that he bound onto himself for reasons we talked about in 236. Someone like Mahito, I think you realize by the end that he was paradoxically restricted by the humanity that he terrorized, that he found inside himself. So I really do think that the only person who can ever truly be free 100% in this setting is the strongest, and that is Sukuna. So I don't think Yuji is totally free. I really think there are a bunch of things that restricts him, but he's able to enact his will in a way that feels more comfortable, healthy, loyal, and empowering than it ever was. And he has a strength that he's never really had before. And he's not the new honored one at all. Not at all. I think the honored one, the idea of the new honored one, or the honored one in general, is so intertwined with strength, and a sort of isolated strength, that anyone who is the honored one will be, by default, unable to find the true answer, or enact that answer upon the world. Gojo wanted to communicate the sheer loneliness of strength to Sukuna, but wasn't able to really do it because through taking the label of the honored one, through the curse and all the highs and lows of that he would not toss aside for anything, it seemed like, in the moment. He lost himself in the fight, and he never really got a chance to communicate that to Sukuna because of that. And it's sort of poetic because that overburdened everything, and through that he was unable to communicate the true beauty of life. And the loneliness of not being able to interact with that, the loneliness of being misunderstood due to your strength. So I think by default, by its very nature, by the nature of the title of the Honored One, that Honored One cannot communicate these sorts of things. Gojo... Who knows if Gojo would have changed anything? Maybe he would have, maybe he wouldn't have. But he undoubtedly had regrets at the end. So much so that he didn't even bother to correct Nanami's inaccurate statements about him, because he looked at them as something that he deserved and something that he couldn't complain about, because that's how he lived his life. Again, this sort of self-punishment. And I don't think he'd wish that on his students. I don't think he'd want them to have that burden. I think he'd want them to carry his torch in spirit, but through a different methodology, because he knows how painful it is, and he knows that the answer that may defeat Sukuna isn't something that he was able to communicate through his life. I think that he knew the answer, but he was unable to express it because he was too close to Sukuna. He was too similar. The differences completely stand out, but the similarities made it so that he could not do anything but engage and express and think of nothing else. So I think that you need someone that isn't the Honored One to properly break through to Sukuna, or rather, even if that's not possible to break through to him, to defeat him. Thematically, I'm talking about, not in terms of mechanics or anything like that. And that's what Yuji does here. It's beautifully illustrated, beautifully presented, an encapsulation about this series that have such an interesting a way of expressing its takes on death and its ideas about death and integrating that with the characters. And the flip side of death is, of course, life, and that is what Yuji sort of emphasizes here. The things that he's come to learn about life. And I think that Yuji's maturity is really properly shown, obviously through the big panels and lines in this chapter. Those go without saying, but I think even earlier on, in the first couple of pages. Because the sort of inciting event for Yuji's character for the series, and the sort of thing that poisoned him, was his grandpa's proclamation that he needs to save as many people as he can so he won't die alone. That he won't be by himself like his grandpa was at the end. And that is something that sort of, I really think, poisoned Yuji. Added a sort of complex to his psychology that caused him to have this desire and need to save everyone, otherwise he would despair and be filled with anxiety and not be able to look at anything that happens in his life as worthwhile unless he is compensating for the death in kind. And, being one-to-one with Sukuna, sharing a body with Sukuna who causes such pain, how could he ever keep up and compensate with that? He can't. So it just wasn't sustainable. And so that is why he had to sort of rejig his thinking in Shibuya. But I think that this chapter shows how open-minded Yuji has become even past that through what he says about his grandpa. So the fact that Yuji's grandfather said this and the cultural connotations behind no one having been there at his funeral, that's been dissected to hell and back. We know about all of that, we know how that poisoned Yuji, etc. It caused the regrets of a dying man to wrap and sort of constrict his worldview, obviously unintentionally, but these are just the things he sort of spouted out at the end of his life. And that constricted Yuji. But Yuji offers a sort of wrinkle to this idea, and he says that he came back here for the first time in 10 years for a funeral for his grandpa's friend. And he talks about how empty the place felt, but that's beside the point. What's really interesting is that Yuji says here, I wonder if that guy would have come to my grandpa's funeral if he had died first. And that is a huge line. That is a huge line that shows a great amount of growth and flexibility and alternate perspective. It shows that Yuji is not bound by that ideology anymore. Maybe there was an element of misfortune to his grandfather's funeral being empty. Maybe his friend would have come if he died a few years later. Maybe if he hadn't died, he would have shown up, and the complex of Yuji's entire character would have changed. Maybe if his friend had spent time with Yuji's grandpa prior to his death, he wouldn't have felt so fatalistic and lonely before the end, and he wouldn't have said those things to Yuji. Maybe his grandpa wasn't actually completely alone. Or maybe the reasons he said that had more to do with his current state, a very impulsive stream of consciousness thing that he was saying in the moment, but perhaps he wasn't actually completely alone throughout his life. Maybe it was just he was alone there. Maybe just one person could change that. Maybe his grandpa would have died smiling if he just had one person outside of Yuji. And then Yuji wouldn't have been totally restricted by this ideology that he took on. His grandpa says that his life was a waste, and that's his right to say. But as the series says, people are defined by the legacy they live through how they live, the memories they form, the people they touch through their lives, and not how they die. Nanami is not defined by the way he died. Nobara is not defined by the way she died. Neither is Junpei, or Gojo, or Choso, or Higuruma. They're defined by the way they live, and the impact they had on the world. And that is why, that all links back to what Todo said to Yuji in Shibuya. Trying to find meaning in the deaths of the fallen may just end up disgracing them. Instead, look at what they entrusted to you, your relationship with them, the legacy they left on the world, rather than trying to grasp for straws for some meaning to make yourself feel better. What matters is not how a person dies, it is how they live, and the memories and legacy they leave behind. And Yuji was anxious at first to die a good death, but he slowly matured to his ambitions then turning from wanting to die a good death into wanting to live a good life. And then everything will follow. If you live a good life, your death will have the meaning you intend. And I think that's stated through the TCB translation of this line, this beautiful line that Yuji says, which is, more than the memories made in one's image, it's within the little tiny fragments that remain, drifting off, where the value of a life lies. Those little moments, the moments of meaning that accumulate through one's life, that in them, through them, makes life worth living. The little moments of connection and warmth and all of that. It's not about memories that last through other people, because those can be misrepresentative. It's about the memories that they themselves created. It's about how they themselves lived their own lives. And Yuji learned this through Shibuya, but now he's able to properly express it. And he's able to look at all these deaths that happened quite recently, Gojo, Choso, Higuruma, and not be totally traumatized and despaired by them. They died doing what they believed in. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't despise Sukuna, but it means that he can use their memories and their connections to empower him forward and try to reach out in this way, as one last gasp. And if this doesn't work out, as he says, he has an ace up his sleeve to kill Sukuna. So throughout my ramble, what I mean to say is that this all results in Yuji having a sheer, pure love for life and humanity and memories, and no real qualms about these deaths. No unhealthy coping, no complexes. Yuji is in his ultimate form, I feel. I still think he's a cog because I still think he needs to be a cog to break this wheel, to fix this setting, or at least stop it from being this rotten. I still think he's a cog, and because I think he needs to be for this world to be saved, since that's his ambition. But he is in his ultimate form, for lack of a better term. He has this love for people and the connections he's made, and humanity and memories and life. And he says that he doesn't know if humans are good or bad or evil inherently, or something in between. But he does know that he appreciates the beauty of humanity. And he finds that fulfilling and worthwhile, this sort of like respite in this torrent of blood. And he doesn't think that Sukuna does value that. And he's right, Sukuna doesn't value humanity at all. So he pities his inability to see beauty in something that is so obviously bright to him, bright and warm and shining, and something that makes life worth living. Sukuna cannot see this. He feels nothing. Like he says in this chapter, upon seeing what Yuji shows him, these warm memories, this sentiment, this nostalgia, Sukuna feels nothing. He understands it on an intellectual level, but he feels nothing. He feels no need for it. He simply doesn't, and doesn't care. And Yuji finds that to be a tragedy. He pities that in him. And it's kind of bold of him. It's kind of ballsy. It's the audacity of this guy to pity Sukuna. And Sukuna feels similarly. And it leads to some very interesting stuff, because, you know, there are lots of ways you can interpret this from Sukuna. Because he says he feels nothing. And I don't think he's lying about feeling nothing about Yuji's account of his childhood. But does he really feel nothing in totality at all? It's interesting. Because like I said, you can interpret this many ways. Maybe he's telling the truth and totally feels nothing, and that's it. Maybe Yuji doesn't move him at all. He feels nothing when he looks at him, and when he says that he's just worse than a speck of dirt, he's not lying. Maybe that's the truth. But I don't think it is. Because he engages with Yuji on a level much higher than he would with something that he supposedly wouldn't care about or didn't care about. I think Yuji is a wrinkle in his psychology. I think they're inseparable. I think Sukuna knows this. I think he knows that Yuji sees things that he cannot and has a power. Whether you want to call it a power or a strength or a wisdom or a worldview or whatever, but he has something that Sukuna cannot see. And I think Sukuna is too intelligent and wise to not acknowledge, subconsciously or otherwise, that Yuji has succeeded in a place where he hasn't. Maybe that's putting it a bit too thick. I'm not saying I totally buy into that, but my point is that Sukuna has taken account of Yuji. He does not completely dismiss him as nothing. That just isn't true. Because look at this chapter. He engages with Yuji. He talks with him. He does archery with him. He talks a bit about flowers. He fishes with him. He actively listens to the words that he says, and he repeats them when acknowledging his feelings about his nostalgic attachment to his home. He compares his reaction to Yuji's words to Yuji's reaction to this old town. You know, I'm sure he wasn't having the time of his life. He looked rather bored through a lot of that, but he engaged with him. He was forced to be here, so it's not like he could have completely avoided all of this. But he could have tuned him out. He could have said nothing. I'm sure he could have not fished. He could have not done archery. But he engaged. Maybe he was bored and had nothing else to do. Maybe he was on a whim. Maybe he had some intellectual curiosity because Sukuna is very raw, but he's also very intelligent. But either way, he listened, and maybe that in itself is evidence of a tiny part of him being reached by Yuji, acknowledging Yuji. Because he's rageful at the end. He looks tilted, he looks angry, upset. He wants to shove Yuji's face in the dirt, he wants to make him suffer. He wants to cause immense pain, and he has this red-hot rancor. But he wouldn't feel that for something or someone that he didn't care about. He absolutely looks at Yuji as someone that has caused a wrinkle in his programming. Someone that he can't fully understand or comprehend. Someone who is, on some level, in some way, more than him. Is he angry because, and this is something I saw Radman on Twitter say that I thought was really cool. Is this because Yuji portrays the beauty of humanity through his memories and shows the worth of a life through memories? And so few of Sukuna's memories are his own. He talks about how he has so many memories that are not tied to him. He recognizes things about Megami's life, for example. So is that a big part of why he can't resonate with it? Maybe. And Yuji thinks about that and is sad for him as a result. And is his pure seething rage in response a demonstrator of avoidance of the fact that maybe he feels similar to Yuji? Not in that he feels similar to Yuji about these things, but that he thinks it's sad that he can't. Is there a yearning in there for memories that would make Yuji's words resonate? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I think it could go either way, but I think it's really interesting to think about these sorts of things. If he really was unaffected by Yuji's words, and his pity, and his audacity, would he be angry? No. He'd be badass and apathetic like he's been the whole series. When the sisters, the twins, had the audacity, had the unwarranted ego to try to summon Sukuna to kill Kenjaku, it's a sort of similar situation where how dare you expect me to serve you? It's similar to how dare you have pity on me. But there he wasn't angry. He just coldly, internally laughed and then killed them. No emotions, really. None at all. Yuji does something very similar, but because it's Yuji, because they have this shared experience, they both shared a body, they shared a mind in a way. They were that whole Cain and Abel fable thematic dynamic there. There is some part of Sukuna that is the other side of the coin of Yuji, the other half. You can't have such polar opposites without there being some sort of synthesis. Because they diverge so strongly, they have to meet somewhere. And so while they may not find a kinship, maybe, like Sukuna says, I think you failed. And Yuji goes, well, damn, it was worth a shot. And he sort of admits that he was wrong and he was unsuccessful. There's still a chance that he could reach through, but let's assume that he doesn't. Even if that doesn't happen, Yuji understands Sukuna, and Sukuna cannot remove the part of himself that is fixated on Yuji. That is his wrinkle, that is his weakness, and that's just thematically outside of whatever it is that Yuji's going to pull on him. But Yuji pities him, and Sukuna lambasts his arrogance in doing so. But prior in the series, I don't think he ever really showed that level of anger to a similar situation. And I think it's because Yuji, this pathetic nobody who he says doesn't affect him, does on some level. And it's no coincidence that this comes with Yuji's sort of self-actualization and epiphany about all that life is. As Yuji blooms here, it sort of forces Sukuna to take notice. Yuji is an aberration for Sukuna, in-universe, and for us, and I just really can't wait to see how it all plays out. How can Yuji kill him? Is he going to? Is Yuji going to defeat him? Is he going to die with him? I have no idea. I think it could go so many different ways, and I can't wait to see how it all closes out. Sorry for rambling. I'm sure that a lot of what I said was repeated over and over, but I was upfront with that at the beginning, so hopefully that's okay. Yeah, this was a masterful chapter. I think it shows so beautifully why Yuji is such an admirable, inspiring, empowering character, and how beautiful it is that he was able to come to this maturity, to this epiphany, even in the face of such blood and conflict and death and tragedy. He loathes Sukuna, he despises him, but he also still, in spite of it all, had the audacity to pity him and reach out for him. And that irrational idealism, that isn't stupid. That really isn't stupid. I don't think it is. I think maybe you would be forgiven for saying that he was foolish earlier on in the series for some of his hopes. But here, I think it very much has its place. It's beautiful. This chapter does so much for Yuji and is a great character study of him and the series' views on life and death and meaning. It further substantiates Yuji's and Sukuna's dynamic as arguably the best in the series. It's definitely one of them. And it's just beautiful. You can check out my video on Yuji for a foundation on some of the concepts I talked about here if you really want to, but this chapter, and some of the stuff since then, obviously progresses things a great deal forward. Anyways, I cannot wait. This is one of the best chapters I've experienced in a long, long time, full of emotions, thoughts, weight. It's beautifully presented, the dialogue is great, at least in the translation I read. It's incredibly evocative, it had me kind of disassociating a little bit, and I think this is JJK in a nutshell. Incredibly cruel at times, but more than anything, this celebration of all that Battle Shonen stands for, while also being an advocation for meaning in life, and not being defined or misrepresented by what others say, in life or death, and seeing the beauty and the truth of things. So yeah, this is greatness to me. I think it's amazing. I think it has immense payoff for so many things throughout the series. But of course, to put it lightly, opinions on Jujutsu Kaisen vary very, very wildly. So feel free to let me know what you think. Did you like this chapter? What are your thoughts on Yuji and Sukuna? Where do you think it'll go from this point on? Did you hate it? Anything. Feel free to tell me what you think. Many thanks for watching, and I promise there will be some videos coming soon, a couple in particular. There will be a One Piece video for Wano Part 3, the Wano finale. That'll be in the next couple weeks. And then after that, there'll be a video on Cyberpunk 2077. I'm currently working away on a Rebirth video, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is a long-term project that will take me many, many months. I've been working on it for 4 months now? 4 or 5 months? And I will be working on it for many more months in the future. It's going to be, at the very least, 6 hours, but probably significantly more. By far my biggest video project on the channel, so that's why things have been a little slower in terms of output, but I'm glad I can put other stuff in the meantime like this, and the videos that are coming up, and stay tuned. So that's in the works, and there's always the streams as well, which we have several times a week. Anyways, I'm rambling. Many thanks for watching. Please feel free to share your thoughts on JJK 265, and thank you guys.